One of the first things we realize when we enter a history classroom is that history is written by the victors. This means that the Native Americans being pushed out of their land for American expansion was necessary, that the Indian caste system is a remnant of Indian and Hindu tradition and culture, not British administration, and it's also the reason why Columbus Day is still a thing. And I'm not saying that everything we've ever learned in history class is a lie, but the fact remains that a lot of it is kind of propaganda in a way, because simply put, most of the things that we learn do not show all sides of the story equally. Another thing that we tend to do is we tend to simplify these issues and the things we learn about into a conflict, or like a story of good versus evil. We look at things as the side that we care about and the side that we support and the side that is going against everything we've ever valued in life. And that kind of sounds a little bit dramatic, but is it really? It's true. And for example, if you look back a couple decades at McCarthyism and the American fight against communism, this conflict was told to the American public as just that, a gigantic fight of good and evil on a monumental scale. McCarthy even once addressed this in a speech as the final Armageddon. This mentality sank deep into the American psyche to the point where even Captain America and Iron Man were fighting against communist leaders trying to make their way onto American soil. And that's what we tend to do as humans, and especially when we walk out of history class, we tend to simplify everything into good and evil. And we do this all around our lives. For example, in fiction and our media, we can see this in Harry Potter with Voldemort versus Harry. We can see this in Lord of the Rings with Sauron and Gandalf. We can see this in classical literature with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we also see this in real life and the polarization of our news media. If you look at a complex topic such as the conflict in Israel and Palestine, we see that the media portrays it as a fight of good and evil. We have both sides taking their place in the spotlight, and the stories are told in different ways using the same facts, with both people taking good and both sides taking bad. And you may be wondering why we do this. I personally believe that oversimplification is a coping mechanism, because the negative aspects of something stand out much more vividly to us than something that is bad. As Jack Nicholson said in A Few Good Men, we can't handle the truth. And for something as faceted and as completely gray as the truth, our simplification of it takes away its dimension, and we lose much of what is potent in it. So why do we actually sit in history class? Well, we do this for a reason. We do this to learn the past and learn from the past, so the errors that we've made that in the past are not repeated. For example, because of history class, I now know never to invade Russia in winter like Hitler and Napoleon, because I am going to fail completely. And we learn from our mistakes, and it's really important that we do this in order to prevent tragedies from recurring, both small, like Peter Parker not realizing that Gwen Stacy needs to stay away from Spider-Man, to tremendously large tragedies, like one of the most evil acts that humanity has committed, genocide. At the end of World War II, the international community, everyone, and I too was appalled to discover that all of the atrocities that had happened in the name of Nazi racial ideologies in concentration camps across Europe. And yet, only 4 decades later, in 1994, we had another Holocaust occurring in Darfur. Both genocides had two things in common. Both were in the quest of racial purity, and both had government involvement. As you can see, we definitely have the potential as humanity to learn from our mistakes and prevent tragedies from occurring. And you may be wondering, how do we make a difference? How can we change history? We're only high schoolers, or we're only people. And I'm not saying at all that there is one answer, and in fact, there are probably millions of them out there. But the one that I want to propose today is representation. In 2012, a study was published by a researcher in New York stating that high schoolers had to look outside of their textbooks, outside of classroom, for information on minorities because they did not get this information from their textbooks. And the fact is, much of our history is minorities. And these stories are lost because these minorities do not have the voice, do not have that majority to speak for them. And in a world where technology and social media is so important, we as young people, we as the new generations have the power to change something. Because where we get our information is from that media around us. We get our information from the internet, from little Facebook headlines in the corner of our screen when we're scrolling through our timelines. And honestly, by increasing representation in the media that we see, on the internet, on social media, maybe even television, we can increase the interest that people have in the stories of minorities. And from there, we can work our ways up to rewriting history itself. Because in our world of expanding resources, in our world where technology itself is exponentially growing, we have an obligation to keep the history that we are currently writing and rewriting true. Thank you.